Welcome, listeners. Oh my gosh, I'm so excited. So, we have Dr. Meg Warren, who's a researcher, author, keynote speaker, senior advisor that works on the intersection of allyship and well being. She's been in 60 plus journal articles and book chapters. She's written books. She writes for Psychology Today, Better and Happier, and has been featured in a number of news outlets across many, many countries. She's also a professor of management at Western Washington University, faculty affiliate at the University of Michigan, and a visiting scholar at institutions in Fiji and Kenya. Welcome, Dr. Warren.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So I love your research. So I first stumbled upon Meg's research on allyship, and she's got some new work that she's working on with the intersection of personality and allyship programs and what can set us up for success. So I'd love to just start there, Meg. How does personality affect fit for something like allyship?
Yeah. Some of our latest research, we've been really intrigued about the idea that we need allyship to be sustainable, right? We can't be thrown off by the waves of the ups and downs around being an ally, especially because most people say they already want to be an ally. So, if that is so, how can we make sure that they're actually able to live up to those values, no matter what? And to do that, one of our pieces that we were looking at was to what extent can allyship then feel like a natural extension, an organic extension of who you are? Values is one, our strengths, our character strengths is one. And then the other is personality. And collectively, personality and character strengths come within these broader concept of traits that are stable, that are relatively unchanging unless we put in a lot of effort and we are in very specific environments that push us in one way or the other. But usually they are about as close to who we are as our concept, our self-concept of ourselves is. Um, so with that in mind, we wanted to look at to what extent can then allyship fit with personality. Now, this also comes from the fact that when I've been speaking about doing research, sharing my research with a variety of different audiences, and we talk about how important allyship is, I regularly hear from people saying to me that, I understand that there's inequity. I understand that I need to be an ally, and we all should be allies. But that's just, I don't know. I don't have the personality for it. We see this in
Mhm.
our research. We recently did a paper on the barriers to allyship published earlier this year. Again, personality came up as an important piece for where people say, for instance, I'm too introverted, I'm too agreeable, I'm too conflict avoidant, I'm too risk averse to really be an ally. This is just not me.
Mhm.
Which basically then assumes that the only way to be an ally is to be courageous, is to be okay with conflict and jump into conflict, is to be this very extroverted personality. So where does that leave the rest of the population that doesn't fit with, those very specific kinds of personalities?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
And you found one of the behaviors that people say they think is what allyship is like calling people, out for actions
Yes.
and things. And it's like, but then when you compare with historically marginalized groups, like what they think allyship looks in action, like that doesn't even register. Like there's all these other micro behaviors too.
Absolutely. That was a real surprise for us when we conducted this earlier study, looking at what people think
Mhm.
allyship is and what kind of behaviors are actually useful. Most men across the board said that the most important way to be an ally is to confront bias by calling out bias. And then when we asked women, they gave a ton of other strategies of what's actually useful for them, and confrontation and calling out did not even feature. So, if but then perceptions matter. If people perceive that there is one real, authentic, super powerful way to be an ally and nothing else is real, authentic allyship, nothing else really matters, then we pigeonhole ourselves into either doing that kind of allyship or not. And then very often justifying why we shouldn't do that kind of allyship because that's going to be bad for, myself and it's going to hurt my prospects in the company or whatever reason. And then it's an easy out.
Hmm. Self-fulfilling prophecy. See, I tried. And that's one of the barriers. I loved your paper on barriers, and there's just so much of a fear factor. I'm going to get canceled. I'm going to do it wrong. I'm going to be judged. Who am I to make a difference? It's just me. And so one of the things, the themes that I've been playing around with, Meg, is like this whole idea of like individual actions versus systemic actions. And I think what's beautiful about allyship programming, if you can get really clever with like how you pick your audiences, especially from a leader perspective, and how you build content and curriculum to like meet people where they're at on their allyship journeys, I think it can straddle both like a systemic approach as well as an individual approach. And so I'm so curious what you think about that. And, if we have listeners that are thinking about building allyship programs, like what might be some considerations to be successful?
Absolutely, absolutely. I think we often frame problems in very complex ways that can end us end with us feeling a little overwhelmed. And when we can break it down to simple behaviors that I can do that are actually going to move the needle, whether you're a leader or you're an employee, at any level of the organization. What can I do within my sphere of influence? And how can being an ally itself boost my leadership ability, develop my leadership ability, and allow me to have greater and greater influence? Because that is the power of allyship, that when done well, when done right, you are strengthening, building more connections, and expanding your networks. So there is real power to this that goes beyond allyship at that point. But it is really about doing it right. And that's where, of course, we have the challenge. But yeah, I absolutely agree with starting with doing allyship at a micro level and then scaling that up to systemic levels, especially
Mhm.
when starting at the systems almost feels like a non-starter when policies are being axed or certain processes are being axed. Then you don't want to be left with, oh, I can't do anything then.
Yeah. And you may not have the ability to influence all of these different systems. So think about it as a both and. Individual micro behaviors really important to train, to model, to prescribe, to give people a menu of options that they can pursue that, based on your research, is tied to who you are, like your identity, your personality, your comfort zone, at least at first. We can extend beyond that comfort zone as people layer on some of these behaviors. But then there's also like a systems approach that once you have critical mass in an organization and you have a good pocket of folks practicing allyship and leading through allyship, which I think leadership is allyship, um, then you start to see, oh, well, the hiring process isn't so inclusive, and like how we handle promotions isn't very objective, and like that's not good for everyone, let alone historically marginalized groups that might be over affected by this. And so I wonder, Meg, you know, one of the things I still get to do, given the contraction in our market, is build and facilitate allyship programs, often with global organizations that, unlike America, have stayed with these movements. And one thing I'm just curious and getting your feedback on this. So one of the first exercises we do that I think is aligned with your research is around self-awareness. Like it has to start from inside. It can't start from outside. Like we saw everyone jump in the deep end in 2020 when they should have started with the baby pool. Like just start with who you are, right? Who am I? Like who do I aspire to be? Like I always ask people like, what do you want your like leadership legacy to look like? Or how would you hope to be remembered? Like, what do you want to aspire to be? Because allyship, I think, is an aspiration. It's not like a proclamation. It's in the eye of the beholder. And then we have people dive into like motivation and why. And then to your point about the how, giving people like some ideas of where to start, but like it's not, I was like, it's not a check the box. It's not like one and done. It's a intentional, consistent approach over time. But what I really like about your research is if we get really smart, and this is where I could probably do some tweaking, is get really smart at like the introspective, like self-awareness piece and your identity, your personality, your values, and like really like customizing your home and how you show up to that. So how do you do this?
Yeah, yeah. I love that a lot of many of us have already been thinking about the motivation very seriously because yes, when we are motivated for the wrong reasons, like checking a box or our own self-interest, or because when so allyship was socially desirable to signal, virtue signal around that, then all of that stops as soon as allyship is not socially desirable, or when it is, when that box does not require to be checked and it's not even on the list anymore.
And
So,
as you said in your research, 2021 was not that long ago. It was the most searched word was allyship, which blew my mind. And we're only like,
absolutely. And so yes, motivation to our why tells us why we want to be in the room. And then the how is about how then we can show up in ways that actually, on a day-to-day basis, on a minute-to-minute basis, actually express allyship in ways where it just feels like it's flowing from us. It's not something that I have to overly think about. I have to overly change myself around because we've got so many messages right now that are constantly telling us we need to change, right? I need to change because my heart rate's too fast. My Fitbit tells me my heart rate's too fast. I am walking too slow and too few steps. I need to eat less salt. Oh gosh, there's nothing I can do right. I can't even
another
walk with my
change.
kids. And
Great.
yes, it's constant feedback messaging that tells me I need to do something differently. And then we can have more and more things that constantly tell us we're imperfect, we're terrible, we need to keep changing. That message is really hard and in terms of palatability, but also it's impractical because we can't do everything all at once. I think what's more useful is to say what I know I want to become a better ally. Great. But how can I do this in a way that just naturally flows for me? And I'm not looking at big changes right now. I'm making small little changes, just a little tweak here and there to start becoming more active. And and what our research shows is that we 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 looked at what kind of personality
Mhm.
profiles. We looked at four different personality profiles and which of these are best positioned for allyship. What we find is that 50% of the population already fits within this profile of being having a well-adjusted personality, of the right levels of extroversion and openness and agreeableness, emotional stability, um, conscientiousness, all of the right mix that already positions us to be an ally. 50%. There's another 41% that's average on these, but they're not bad, right? That
Mhm.
they're still relatively well positioned to be an ally. We're only talking about 91% here.
That's way beyond critical mass.
And that's way beyond critical mass. We make assumptions of what allyship should look like. We think allyship should be highly risky. If there is
Yeah.
no major cost to us, that's not worth the allyship doing at all. That the only way to be a real ally that matters is to be extremely courageous, extremely brave, to be very comfortable with conflict and get into conflict when it is required. And what we find in our research is that only only about 3 to 5% of people would actually be comfortable doing those kinds of allyship
Hmm.
behaviors that fit with that
Hmm.
profile, right?
Yeah.
And then at the other end of the extreme, people who also believe that there's only this one extremely courageous kind of ally that's okay. And I can't do any of that at all, and therefore I shut myself out of allyship. Uh,
Mhm.
that only fits with another 4%.
Yeah.
4% of people are too reserved and too cautious to even step into the room at all, that they'll have
Mhm.
nothing to do. So that leaves us again with 91% of the population that's workable.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, and I love that. I love thinking about the personality traits that are conducive and aligned with allyship and knowing that most people fit that, which is pretty much aligned with like the research we see in desirability for allyship too. So not only is there a skill set, but there's like a will set for allyship. It's really just, again, it comes back to this barrier of that first step, Meg. And so I'd love for you just to leave our listeners with like, if you had, I always hesitate to do this way because it's like there's no checklist, there's no magic wand here, but like if there were some starter steps, if you've got it in you and you want to be a good person and help other people, which most of us are motivated to do, like what are some starter steps that we know are evidence-based?
Yeah, I think whether it's individuals wanting to do this or whether it's in an organization and you want to do this as a program, I think first identifying, just being in touch again with what are personality traits, what are our key character
Mhm.
strengths, is a good start. And then and we share this in our paper, just this match of for these particular character strengths and personality traits, here are the allyship strategies that are the best starting points. And starting with those allyship strategies might really get us just comfortable being an ally. We can test it out, try it on for size. Chances are that we'll be fairly successful because they already come naturally to us. They're just a very specific way of using those same personality strengths and character traits that we use every day, all the time to do our best work. That's where
Yeah.
our best work comes from anyway. So just using that in for allyship and seeing how it's received. And even
Mhm.
when we do get negative feedback or constructive feedback around it, those are also easier for us to change because they fit with our personality. It's easier to make changes in our areas of strength. So working with that as a starting point, and then once we start becoming really good allies around those allyship strategies, then playing around to doing things that are more challenging, more ill-fitting, if you will. But that just tells you where your challenges can be and where you can start pushing yourself to do a little bit more. And in those areas, knowing that because I am challenging myself, I should give myself a little grace if I make mistakes. I should give myself grace and the permission to ask for help, to get the resources, to be
Mhm.
candid about what I don't know and what doesn't come naturally for me. And that's okay because I'm already doing a lot. That's good. So now I can ask for help when I'm stretching myself.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. And it's not the grandiose calling out bias, like things that are usually on that first step list. It's more when you're getting started, like checking in with people, offering support, showing that you care, noticing what's going on around you, and noticing like perhaps exclusionary behavior and checking in with somebody about that. So, these types of micro behaviors, to your point, kind of build. And then as you layer on more and more, I think that's the beauty of allyship. It's a journey, not a destination. And this is a long game, which in our short-term instant gratification world, I think asks, we just have to acknowledge that this work will continue beyond our lifetimes, but it's legacy work. And it's always shifting and changing, which I think also makes it like really interesting and enjoyable. And it's research like yours that helps us move forward successfully. So thank you, Meg, for sharing some of this wonderful research. And listeners, it's based on the Big Five personality assessment, which in the academic world tends to be the most valid tool for personality. But of course, there's other personality assessments you can use as a starting point. But Meg's research specifically has customizable strategies based on your Big Five assessment. So we'll be sure to link to the research in the show notes. And Meg, I just thanks so much for all the great work that you do. How can our listeners follow you and stay in touch?
Thank you. Actually, just one more thing I'd like to add is that along with the personality, the character strengths that I also mentioned, there's also a really great tool, the values and action tool, to be able to assess your character strengths. So I'm happy to link both of those and provide those resources. Both are free to use. So please feel free to.
Thank you.
And yes, you can get in touch with me on my website, and I'll share a link to this paper as well. That'll be available for everyone to read.
Thanks, Meg. So appreciate your expertise and time with us today.
Thank you so much.